Hello, welcome to another Friday chat. I heard you loud and clear. All to the new subscribers, welcome. Thank you. I really appreciate being here. My name is Laura Forsick. I'm the executive director of space consulting firm Astrolytical, 20 years in the space sector. I'm also a working mom, and my husband had another meeting that was more important than my live stream. And so I'm going to be taking this call with the baby, which is not the first time I've given a talk with a baby. So this could be a disaster or it could be just fine. We're going to see how this turns out. Stay tuned. So I do want to, again, welcome the new ones. I heard you loud and clear. You want more hot takes from me, hot space takes, which is completely understandable because honestly, that's how I got my following on Twitter, X. So shouldn't be surprised. But if you were watching my YouTube over the past, however many months I've been doing this year was the first time I've been attempting to do YouTube and experimenting. That's why I've been all over the place. And I really was trying to figure out what the audience wanted, who you were, and what content you wanted. And so I think I figured it out. So thank you for letting me know. I'm going to be doing more space hot takes in the future. These live streams are question and answer. So if you have any questions that come to you, type it in the chat. I won't be watching the chat the entire time, but type it in the chat. I'll get to it when I get to it. Or if you're watching this, the recording, you can put it in the comments in the recording. Really put it anywhere and I will find it. You can also reach out to me on email or social media. So I also want to tell you that if this is not your preferred method of communication, you can get the newsletters in your inbox on Monday mornings. It is the same content plus extra details and extra information. So go to astrolytical.com/subscribe. And that's going to be in the episode notes if you don't have that memorized. I want to get right into it here. I do want to note that there was a question that came in yesterday or 2 days ago from Rules123, or it might be B Rules123, who writes, Gateway does seem pretty useless. How would you design the Artemis architecture? So stay tuned. I'm going to cover that question at the end of my presentation here about the question that came in earlier from Gil Horton. There seems to be a new space race to the moon, in particular to the resources on the moon's south pole. How does international space policy apply as various nations compete for those resources? Is the space policy climate more competitive or cooperative? So thank you for that question, Gil. It is a fascinating question. Disclosure, I'm not a lawyer. I am a scientist by training. So my background is in lunar regolith, but I have no background in law. I just know what I picked up from the wonderful space lawyers that I have in my community and my network. And this could honestly be an hour-long presentation. It is several essays worth of material. So we are not going to cover the entire thing. We are simply going to do a quick overview of space resources. So I want to get this out of the way just in the beginning. There are several international laws that explain a little bit about what we're going to be talking about, but there's no one definitive answer. So it's all open to interpretation. So we're going to be covering some of these international treaties and agreements first, and then I'll dive into U.S. law. And I'm not really going to cover a lot of law outside of the U.S. law simply because I'm from the United States. And therefore, my expertise is U.S., applications of U.S. law within the context of space resources. But it's too much of a stretch for me to try to go beyond that. So, Gil, if you are truly curious about this, ask a space lawyer because they're going to be able to give you all kinds of answers that I can't. But I can tell you that, for example, this question goes back to many decades, where the Treaty on Principles govern the Articles of States in the exploration of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. That's the Outer Space Treaty. That's what we call it, 1967. So that's how far back they were thinking about this earlier than that, I'm sure. But 1966 was when they wrote up that treaty. 1967 was when it was signed. And there are, as of count today, 114 countries that are party to, and another 22 are signatories. So that is most of the nations of the world are party to the Outer Space Treaty and all of the major spacefaring nations. So that's where we typically start when it comes to international law and when it regards to space, is what is the UN's guidelines here that have been signed on by the majority of the countries. So Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty states, outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. Okay, so nobody can plant a flag on the moon and claim that it's territory of their country. So when the United States planted the U.S. flag on the moon, it did not declare the moon or any part of the moon U.S. territory. Um, so I'm just getting that out of the way right there. But as for interpretations about ownership of the regolith, I'm going to be using regolith as the scientific term. That's the dirt, the dust, the resources that are on the moon. And this is more broadly a discussion of space resources. But for the immediate conversation, we're going to be talking about the moon simply because that's where the international space activities are focused. Yes, there are some companies that are going after asteroid mining, but that's further out activity. It's not really something that we're going to be doing in the short term. Medium term, I'd say. I was just talking to someone who heads up a company a few days ago whose long-term goal is asteroid mining. And we're just not there yet. We're going to be mining the moon first. Oh, and I should really get into that. So stay tuned for what I mean by that. And so there are lots of disagreements about what Article 2 actually means in practice. And so then we want to go a little bit further to the agreement governing the activities of states on the moon and other celestial bodies, more commonly known as the Moon Agreement or Moon Treaty of 1979. And this is not a widely accepted treaty. There are 18 states that are party to this treaty and a few others who have signed on. And the United States and none of the major spacefaring countries, the United States, China, Russia, have not signed the Moon Agreement. And that Moon Agreement does state, so there are some countries that did sign this, that states the, as reflected in the provision of this agreement, the moon and its natural resources are the common heritage of mankind. Now we'd say humankind. The moon is not subject to national appropriation. I can't say that word at first go. The moon is not subject to national appropriation by any claim of sovereignty by means of use or occupation or by any other means. Neither the surface nor the subsurface of the moon, that's below the surface, or nor any other part, therefore, or of its national, okay, I must have read that wrong, nor of any part thereof or its natural resources can become the property of any state, international, intergovernmental, or non-governmental organization, national organization, or non-governmental entity, or of any natural person. So therefore, the Moon Agreement really excludes ownership of any part of the moon, and that would, logically conclude any part of the regolith on the moon. Okay, so that's the Moon Agreement, not signed by the United States. The United States has rejected the Moon Agreement. And instead, we have the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitive Act of 2015. I remember when this was signed, it was like, yeah, this is obvious, duh. But it was like finally like some definitive thing in U.S. law that says that the president is to facilitate commercial exploration for any commercial recovery of space resources by United States citizens, discourage government barriers to the development in industries for commercial exploration for any, I'm going to say that again, because I lost my train of thought here. Yeah, I'm not good at doing this live, obviously. Safe and stable industries for commercial exploration for and commercial recovery of space resources in manners consistent with the international obligations of the United States, that would be the Outer Space Treaty, and promote the rights of the United States citizens to engage in commercial exploration for and commercial recovery of space resources free from harmful interference in accordance with the international obligations of the United States and subject to authorization and continued supervision by the federal government. So basically, the Outer Space Treaty says that all nations party to it do have an obligation to continually monitor what its citizen states, any company based in the United States that is a U.S. organization is acting in accord with the Outer Space Treaty. And so the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitive Act pretty much says that, yes, we are encouraged as long as it is in alignment with the Outer Space Treaty. Then we go forward a few more years here to the Artemis Accords, which is actually one of my favorite topics. I can totally geek out about this, so that'll be another live stream. But the Artemis Accords right now has 33 signatories. It's kind of on like a momentum, like it's the past couple of months has been like boom, 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 like one signatory after another after a long pause of not having any new ones. So it's up to 33 as of this recording. And it is a multilateral agreement that is between different countries, right? So the United States leads it, but it is not like a UN. I told you this could be disastrous or it could be fine. He's tired, so don't know how this is going to go. But in any case, so the Artemis Accords is really meant to work the Outer Space Treaty started by further defining the norms of behavior in space, not just for the moon, and so not just for the Artemis program, despite the name, but for really any activity that could be done by any other party of this agreement in space. So the part that we care about, though, is Section 10, which is the signatories emphasize that the extraction and utilization of space resources, including any recovery from the surface or subsurface of the moon, Mars, comets, or asteroids, should be executed in a manner that complies with the Outer Space Treaty and in support of safe and sustainable space activities. The signatories affirm that the extraction of space resources does not inherently constitute national appropriation under Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, and that contracts and other legal instruments relating to space resources should be consistent with that treaty. So that pretty much says, yeah, we need to abide by the Outer Space Treaty, but we are also going to allow the extraction of space resources, right? Interestingly, it seems like the Artemis Accords and the Moon Agreement contradict when it comes to this type, the use, extraction, ownership of property of these resources in space. However, there are currently 4 countries that are party to both the Moon Agreement and signatories of the Artemis Accords. That would be Australia, Mexico, the Netherlands, and Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia has actually decided to leave the Moon Agreement. Back in January of this year, they announced that they gave their 1-year notice. That's all you need to leave an agreement is a 1-year notice to get out of the Moon Agreement. And so by January 2024, just a few weeks from now, about a month from now, January 5th, technically, the Saudi Arabia is no longer going to be under the Moon Agreement. And therefore, they have put all of their emphasis on the Artemis Accords, which I just find fascinating that some countries have decided that they can do both, that it's not in contradiction. And some countries like Saudi Arabia have decided to choose the path of the Artemis Accords. So I find that fascinating. If you're a space lawyer out there, I would love to talk to you more about this. So fast forward a few months after the Artemis Accords got started was a series of contracts issued by NASA. This was December 2020, so 3 years ago. And this was just so fascinating to me. It was an agreement by NASA. They awarded contracts to companies to go mine the moon. So actually collect the regolith and put it in a pile, a collection bin, something. And NASA was going to pay a company to do that. They didn't have to bring it back to Earth. They didn't have to do anything with it other than just collect it, prove that they can do that very first step in collecting lunar resources. Sort of like if you've been following the news with the Mars sample return, it's sort of like what's been done already, where we sent a rover, we went to collect tubes of Martian regolith, and we kind of left them on the surface to be collected later. That's essentially what NASA is asking these companies to do. And what's also interesting about these contracts was that they're not all U.S. countries. Yeah, they're not all U.S. companies is what I mean to say. So it's international. So the awards were given to Lunar Outpost in Colorado, Master Space Systems in Mojave, California, iSpace of Europe and Luxembourg, and iSpace of Japan and Tokyo. Those are the same company, just different subsidiaries, I think is how they word it, but it's essentially the same company, just in different headquarters. Now, Masten Space Systems no longer exists. They went under. Unfortunately, I miss Masten, but Astrobotic acquired most of their IP, their technology, and their people. I do not know if Astrobotic, I should ask somebody over there. If anyone from Astrobotic is watching, I'm curious if they're still going after it, if that NASA contract applies to them. My guess is not, because NASA CLPS provider contracts, commercial lunar payload services, Masten had some of those CLPS contracts with NASA that did not get transferred to Astrobotic, because Astrobotic did not technically acquire Masten. Masten went in bankruptcy and then the assets got sold in bankruptcy, and that's how Astrobotic got it. So my guess is it's just the companies that are left, which is Lunar Outpost and then those 2 iSpace companies. Now, also interesting is the amount of money that was awarded in these contracts. This is like kind of an aside, but I just find it funny because we're not talking an astronomical amount of money here. This is like to prove a point. This was not to actually like make money. This is not necessarily for commerce for these companies. This was more like proving the legality. This is why I'm emphasizing it, is because under US law, we can do this. And this was like proving that legality of, yes, we are not only can do this, we are going to do this. And we're going to, it's just token amounts of money here. So iSpace Europe, $5,000. This is what they proposed, by the way. The companies proposed these dollar figures. iSpace Europe, $5,000. Masten Space Systems, $15,000. iSpace Japan, $5,000. Lunar Outpost, $1. $1. And 10% of that was paid upfront. So in 2020, when these awards were given, Lunar Outpost was paid 10 cents by NASA, which I think is hilarious. I just find that so funny. So basically, all of these companies at some point, and all of their dates are wrong. By the way, if you look at that press release from 3 years ago, they were all way too optimistic about when they were going to do this. But at some point, there will be some company that proves that they can collect lunar regolith, and NASA's going to pay them just to collect it, not even to do anything with it. So that topic has gone on. I don't want to continue this too much, but if you have any additional questions, put them in the comments, put them in the chat, or talk to a space lawyer, because honestly, this stuff is fascinating. It's really going to be who gets there first to be able to say what happens. And there are a lot of people who disagree with this, by the way. So I told you ahead of time that I was coming from a US perspective, but there are many countries around the world that think this is the wrong way to go, that there are some people who believe that we should be leaving it pristine for science. And as a lunar scientist by background, I completely understand that perspective. I don't agree with it, but I understand it because the moon is an untouched world. It's a desolate world. That's what Buzz Aldrin, he called it magnificent desolation. So there's nothing there. There's absolutely no life. Like, we're not disturbing any ecosystem of life on the moon. But still, there are some people who want to preserve that scientific integrity. And I do agree that there should be some regions that are undisturbed for scientific reasons, because we can learn a ton about Earth and our solar system by studying the moon. So as a lunar scientist, I completely understand that. But I don't think that we should, put barriers in front of progress for that. I think there should be a balance. There are also some countries around the world, some people who think that we should not have a first come, first serve kind of thing. They're worried that just even landing there, because of the harmful interference idea, where if you land there, you disturb the regolith. That regolith kicks up. My colleague Phil Metzger, he's done fantastic research. He's at UCF now, which is my graduate university. And he has done some fantastic work. I worked with him for a summer when he was at Kennedy Space Center at SwampWorks, and they've done fantastic work to show that even just a little bit of disturbing of the surface by retro rockets, if you're landing, can really kick up so much regolith. We've seen damage from Apollo on the Surveyor cameras, for example. I've seen it. I've held Surveyor fabric in my hands that showed me like the pitting, the damage that was done by the Apollo landing. So like, this is a real thing. It's not like they're just kicking up dirt for no reason, but like, pun intended. The people who are complaining about this have a real reason to, because you can use that idea of harmful interference to say that anybody who lands anywhere, nobody else should work anywhere near it. And therefore that's like a de facto sovereignty claim. I don't agree with that, but I can understand it. Again, this is not settled by any means. So if you want to go into legalities about this, go ahead and talk to a space lawyer. And I've been focusing on the moon because that's, again, where we're going first. But then there's the legalities of asteroids and the dual use nature of capturing an asteroid and bringing it back to Earth, or maybe you capture it. And there's just so many different ways to look at it. I don't think people are too upset about the idea of property of asteroid material. I don't think that's as controversial as the moon. But we might find that Mars ends up being super controversial too. So we're not there yet to really figure out how to do property rights and regolith sales on the moon. I'm sorry, on Mars. But the moon will be a testing ground to show us how we're going to do this on Mars. Another thing I don't want to go too into because of time, but there have been a few lawsuits that have settled the case here in the United States that the that moon material can be owned by private individuals. So there, I think, like at least 2 lawsuits have been settled that pretty much say a person can buy parts of the moon, like they can own parts of lunar regolith that came back from Apollo. I'm not talking about meteorites. I'm talking about like actual dirt, dust fragments that came back from the Apollo astronauts. There are some people who now like own it as individuals. And so like here in the United States, the law is pretty much settled, but around the world, it is not. So thank you so much, Gil, for the question. I loved that question. I'm going to go back to B rules or rules 1, 2, 3. Gateway does seem pretty useless. How would you design the Artemis architecture? Oh, this is so fantastic a question, but I'm not the right person to ask about how to design the Artemis architecture. So this is something that has been studied, talked about ad nauseum for decades. Like since Apollo, we have been debating the best way to go ahead and do any kind of return to the moon, onto Mars. If you talk to like Buzz Aldrin, there's the Aldrin cyclers. That's more of a Mars thing. But like, yeah, there's no right way. The video that got a lot of attention that I released on Wednesday this week, I talked about how Artemis is a compromise. It is a compromise between many different individuals, engineers, scientists, policymakers, stakeholders. It is an architecture of compromise, which I don't like necessarily, but I understand how it came about. However, I do want to touch upon the first part of this question, which is Gateway seems pretty useless. And I've gone back and forth. So when Gateway was first announced, which was before Artemis was even named, Gateway had several different names. And the reason why Gateway was created, in my opinion, was because we were between administrations. So the Trump administration had not yet come in yet. And we really didn't know how the Trump administration was wanting to take space policy, the direction of NASA. And so in years past, it was almost like a routine that a new administration would just upend whatever NASA was doing and tell NASA to go in a different direction. We saw that after the George W. Bush administration with the cancellation of Constellation. We saw that after the Obama administration with the cancellation of the asteroid redirect mission. But our Gateway was designed to sort of be that, like, whichever way the administration wants to go, Gateway can fill that need. Because Orion was also sort of like that. Orion, the CEV from previous years, was also sort of that. Whatever way the administration wants to go, we can fill that need. So you want to go to the moon, you want to go to Mars, you want to go to asteroids, you want to go anywhere. Well, Orion can do that for you, and Gateway can do that for you. So it really wasn't meant to serve a specific purpose at first. It has since evolved, of course. And so at first, I did not like the idea of Gateway, but I understood it as that kind of, well, it is something that the administration can get behind, the Trump administration, now the Biden administration can get behind. And it's also something for international cooperation. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I really hate the idea of the Gateway. I really don't think it serves the purpose that it was meant to serve. I think that it is a distraction. I think that it is a money pit. I think that the idea of international cooperation and putting international partners in alignment with hardware goals is fantastic. And let's do that on the surface of the moon. Let's do that with Artemis Base Camp. Imagine if you had international cooperation to build Artemis Base Camp, just the way that you've got international cooperation to build Gateway right now, but actually doing something that we want to do that we have been ignoring. There's no solid plans for Artemis Base Camp. There's no solid plans for a sustainable, long-lasting base on the surface of the moon at this time. It's just sort of vague PowerPoint slides at this time. And so if we put in that kind of money and attention to Base Camp and didn't have Gateway, imagine what we could accomplish. Imagine the international agreements that we could accomplish. So China is sort of doing this. China has its own research station idea on the moon where it's getting international partners, international agreements to build this base on the moon. So China's already doing this. So I actually think that Gateway's going to, not that I think that the competition between China is like the reason to do this, not at all, but like China's going to beat us when it comes to a base on the moon, unless Starship ends up being our base on the moon, which it could. But yeah, so a Gateway I don't think serves that purpose. Also, as a lunar scientist, I am furious that the idea that we would just go circle the moon, in this weird halo, rectilinear halo orbit, instead of actually landing on the surface of the moon and studying the surface of the moon from the surface of the moon. Like, imagine if you were an astronaut and you were sent to the moon, and this is not like Artemis 2 I'm talking about, this is Artemis like 4 or later. And you were sent there and you were like, oh, no, you're not going to touch down. I mean, sure, Artemis 3, they had astronauts that set foot on the moon, but you're not going to do that. They're like, what? So yeah, no, I don't really like the idea of the Gateway. I understand some of the arguments for it, and there are some legitimate arguments for it. I can't deny that, but I think that it's more of a workaround because Gateway is in existence right now, and it's going to be hard to cancel it because of the international agreements. Again, imagine if we had Artemis Base Camp and it was hard to cancel Artemis Base Camp because of international agreements. I just think we did this so wrong. So yeah, thank you so much, Rules123, for that question. Anybody else have any other questions, please, again, submit them in the comments. And so, baby did okay, didn't we? Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. I am still learning this whole live stream thing. I'm still learning this YouTube thing. If you have any suggestions, comments, ideas for improvement, or topics you want me to cover, please put them in the comments or send me a note some other way. And again, if you want this in your inbox, go to astrological.com/subscribe. Thank you.